produced. So this book, and the reason I'm interested in it, is this book, which is called Tafsir Nash'atain wa Tahsir Sa'adatain, which means Tafsir yufassiru is to analyze or categorize. It's to look at something bit-tafsil, in detail, to really exposit it. The Nash'atain, Nash'a is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about Nash'at al-ula wa Nash'at al-akhirah. So Nash'a means to create, but it really has the idea of creating in stages or degrees. And this is why the Darwin's theory sometimes is called madhab al-nashu wa tatawwur, the madhab al-nashu. So it's like evolution. So the nash'a has that idea of, and that's why tanshi'a is like tarbiyah, tanshi'a, yunashi al-walad, to bring up the child. So it's the idea of a kind of evolution, but it also refers to the creation, the first creation, which is here in the dunya, that went through stages, and then the second creation, which is in the afterlife. So he's going to explain those two creations to us. وَتَحْصِيرُ سَعَادَتَيْنِ حَصَّلَ يُحَصِّلُ is to acquire something. So تَحْصِيرُ سَعَادَتَيْنِ is to acquire the two sa'ada. So sa'ada is eudaimonia, for those of you who studied the ethics. Sa'ada is a comprehensive term which has happiness, the idea of felicity, of bliss, of rapture, of joy. Sa'id. So in our tradition, Sa'id specifically refers to the one who is saved. And it's the opposite of Shaqi. So Shaqi is the one who is damned. So Sa'id, and that's why the Prophet ﷺ loved it as a name. And he was always happy when he heard somebody say, Ya Sa'id. Like he would turn, because it was as if they were calling him. So the idea of Sa'ada is really happiness, and it's not psychological happiness. It's not temporary happiness like the happiness that people have in the dunya. Somebody might be happy one day, the law of undulation. One day you're up, the next day you're down. Do dinki dunya hai. It's that idea of, you have ups and downs in your life. That's not what they're talking about with Sa'ada. Sa'ada is a state of felicity in the soul. So the Sa'id is the one who's saved. And so he wants to show us how to get that station. So he says in the Muqaddimah of the Kitab, and the Muqaddimah is always to introduce you, to tell you what the book is about. So he begins, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, because the Prophet ﷺ said, Kullu amrin dhi barin la yubda'u bi Bismillah fahuwa abtar. Any matter that is of moment or concern that does not begin with Bismillah, it's cut off from barakah. It's severed, which is troubling because the modern secular era, everything is done without Bismillah. Like previous peoples always did things in the name of God. Modern people, they don't do anything in the name of God. And so all these things that they're building, all of these things they're working on, they're cut off from barakah. And that's why they end up doing more damage than good. So he begins Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of Allah, the Merciful, the Compassionate. وَبِهِ نَسْتَعِينَ. This is the isti'ana. In fact, the ba there, Bismillah, is for isti'ana. According to some of them, it's we're seeking the help of God. إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينَ. So the isti'ana is taking the aun, the help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَهُوَ حَسْبُنَا وَنِعْمَ الْوَكِيلُ. And this formula, Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil, is a very important one. It's said to be what Ibrahim alayhi salam said when he was going to be thrust into the fire. Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil. God suffices us, God is enough for us, and He's the best of guardians. So he begins, Alhamdulillah, alladhi arsala bin nubuwwati abduhu wa allamana ala lisanihi hamduhu wa raghhabana fima indahu wa nasaru an yusalli ala nabiyhi Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa an yahdiyana bi awdahi dalilan ila anjahi sabilan wa bi aqwa hujjatan ila awdahi mahajjatan قال أبو القاسم الراغب. So he begins praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who sent with Nabuwa his servant. And abd is the highest maqam. Because the abd, the thing about the abd and the reason that we had this in the world is to understand this. The abd does things for the Sayyid and doesn't expect a reward. Because they're just owned. They're the servant. Maybe they can hope for a reward, but they don't expect a reward. And that's why the abd is the highest maqam in our tradition. Subhanalladhi asra bi abdihi. He called him, he didn't see bi nabiyyihi. He could have said with his prophet on the Isra, but he said bi abdihi because the ubudiyya is the highest. The hur does things he's independent in that way. Whereas the abd is a servant. The abd is mamluk. And so the real servant is the one that doesn't expect anything from his Lord. La ikraha fid deen. There's no compulsion in the religion. True religion is you don't feel compelled. True religion comes from the heart. Compulsion is when you feel compelled to do something. You feel obligated to do it. True religion, the religion of the abd, is the religion of one who's doing it without expecting anything, wanting to do it for their Sayyid. So then he says, and who taught us on the tongue of his Prophet ﷺ how to praise him, and gave us desire for that divine presence. And we ask him to give benedictions upon our Prophet ﷺ, Muhammad wa ala alihi, and his family, and to guide us to the awdah dalil, bi-awdahi dalilan, with the clearest of proofs, to the most successful of paths, with the strongest of demonstrations, on the clearest of roads. The mahajja, taraktukum ala al-mahajjat al-bayda. I've left you on this wide road that's clear, easy to traverse. So he says then Abu Qasim, that was his kunya, Abu Qasim. And there's a hadith, la tukannu bi kunyati, don't use my kunya. They say that that's only in his time. I mean, there's a khilaf, but the majority of ulama said it was only for his time so that people wouldn't have his name. They also tended to avoid that name, the Prophet ﷺ, because they never wanted to hear the Prophet, his name cursed or spoken ill of. Which is why in some cultures they actually changed, like they go from Muhammad to Mehmet. They actually change it for that reason. Or they shorten it, abbreviate it in other places. So he's Abu Qasim, and he's called Ar-Raghib. Sometimes he's Mufaddal, sometimes he's Fadal al-Asfahani. He was born in Isfahan, probably sometime in the late 4th century, around maybe 360 something. I mean, he was already active by he might have even been earlier than that. Bizarrely, there's a complete difference of opinion about his death date. So some say that he died in the early part of the 5th century, and that's Imam Suyuti's opinion in Wa'at al-Nuhat. And you'll find on the Wikipedia page on him that he died in 502, which is not possible. So some say he died in 535. So he's one of the few ulama in the history of Islam that there's literally an entire century of difference of opinion about his death date. So we don't know. But the strongest opinion is that he died somewhere in the early period of the 5th century, probably around 410, 420 maybe. He might have even reached higher than that. The minister that he wrote this for was in power in the late 4th century, so around 380, 390.